Joining me now is Sky News host and National Affairs editor at the Daily Telegraph, James Morrow. James, welcome to the program. Let's get started with what's actually underpinning this surplus. Labor's more than happy to spruik it, but what's interesting is how much of that is based on taxes from Australians. We're not just talking about the big taxes from the booming fossil fuel exports, but last night's budget revealed that 50% of Commonwealth tax revenue is going to be paid by individuals as taxpayers. James, when all the talk is on how tough the average household is doing right now, it's pretty galling to realise just how much individual taxpayers are carrying in this surplus.
Well, yeah, indeed, Amanda, and you hit on a real contradiction in this budget here. You know, on the one hand, as you point out quite correctly, they're essentially relying on wage inflation to help carry the budget, to help keep them, over the line and in a surplus, at least for this one particular year. And of course, thanks also to the many people in the mining sector who also got them there. But on the other hand, they're telling us that all of this spending, all of this essentially stimulus, because it looks very much like stimulus by another name, is somehow not going to be inflationary. So they can't have it both ways. And that's a fundamental contradiction economically in this budget. And I just don't know how Jim Chalmers, with all his happy talk around this, winds up ultimately squaring that circle. It's going to hit up against reality eventually.
Yeah, I think you're right. It was interesting to observe today, James, that when Chalmers was asked where he saw his budget in light of previous governments, whether, Howard had his battlers, Rudd had working families and Morrison had quiet Australians, Chalmers was coy in defining his budget by one group and responded in this way.
When it comes to our priorities in the budget, we made them really clear last night. We want to support people who are doing it especially tough, at the same time as we support the legitimate aspirations of Middle Australia.
He's really walking that tightrope of appealing to his growing left support while not as much trying to alienate the middle. But what was so interesting, I thought, was the texts revealed today in The Australian between Paul Keating and Jim Chalmers from several Saturdays ago. James, both men are very proud of their humble upbringings, Bankstown for Keating, Logan for Chalmers, and yet when Chalmers released his manifesto, he copped a lot of criticism for moving away from Hawke and Keating's model. Do you think he's trying to head back into that direction?
Well, it'd be nice to think so, but I don't really see it. That talk about aspirational middle Australia, I don't see where aspirational middle Australia, gets a Guernsey in this budget. They don't get any sort of handouts. That goes to people at the bottom end of the economic spectrum and to people at the top end of the economic spectrum. The twiggy forests and everybody who invests in renewables and things like that. But people in the middle, there's actually going to be more discouragement from doing things like, building your own wealth, not being dependent on government, that sort of thing. But this whole bit of, I guess you could call it hagiography by proxy with Jim Chalmers and Paul Keating is so curious to me because, first of all, wasn't Paul Keating supposed to be really on the nose with Labor after all of his talk about AUKUS? I didn't know we were rehabilitating him that quickly. But more to the point, though, I think it misses a fundamental point, Amanda, and that is this. Paul Keating grew up in Bankstown, a battling suburb in Western Sydney. His father, though, was the proprietor of a successful engineering supply business that couldn't get a loan from the banks here, even though he had a letter of intent from the Malaysian government to buy equipment from him, and he wasn't able to expand his business. Paul Keating took this experience with him his whole life when he deregulated the banks later on as treasurer, and, he has that experience that was very much about reforming, making things easier for people in the middle to do business, to succeed, to aspire. And I don't know that Jim Chalmers quite gets that same idea of, entrepreneurship, of working hard, building a business. I don't just know that that's the same sort of experience that Jim Chalmers thinks that he had and that he's trying to bring to bear as treasurer.
Yeah, I think you're right. The formative experiences of life come down to more than just your suburb or your postcode.